Hello everyone. Today we have a serious topic on buying guide. We are going to discuss should we buy the Nvidia GeForce GTX 1060 or not. The GTX 1060 is undeniably a great graphics card, offering plenty of potential for overclocking while also being a capable performer in VR. If you're looking to spend over £220 on a graphics card, then it's a good choice, but it isn't a complete no-brainer. The AMD Radeon RX 480 has 2GB more memory than the GTX 1060 for a little less cash, although its overall performance is slightly slower. For raw power, the GTX 1060 is unmatched at this price. However, it's actually the 4GB AMD Radeon RX 480 that poses a problem here. Benchmarks point towards the £180 4GB model of the card performing just a couple of percentage points slower than the 8GB model, while also costing £50 less than the GTX 1060. If you're happy to spend upwards of £240 on a graphics card, the GTX 1060 is a great choice, but with uncertainty over how much pre-overclocked graphics card from third parties will actually cost, it's hard to make a definitive recommendation. The addition of a 3GB model has muddied the water somewhat, giving excellent performance for a significantly lower price. When I get one in for review, I'll update this conclusion. Our verdict: a great graphics card for 1440p in VR, but it isn't the ultimate in value for money. Nvidia GeForce GTX 1060 VR. The GTX 1060 is a capable VR card, scoring 8.8 in Valve's rather opaque Steam VR benchmark. In my own testing with Project Cars, which is one of the tougher VR games around, I was able to set the graphics to high and achieve a smooth frame rate with a full grid of cars at a rainy Donington Park. Of course, unlike the GTX 1080, it isn't able to handle the highest possible settings, but for the money it's capable enough. Still, if you're seriously considering buying a VR headset in the next couple of years, it would be prudent to opt for a higher-end graphics card such as the GTX 1070, just to secure decent performance for future VR titles that might be more graphically challenging. Nvidia GeForce GTX 1060 overclocking. There's plenty of headroom for overclocking the GTX 1060 Founders Edition. The cooler may be fairly basic from the outside, but the fan is able to draw in more than enough cool air to allow for a very stable 220 MHz overclock, providing a performance boost of around 7% in most games. Although it's unlikely that the majority of people will be buying the Founders Edition card, its ability to overclock is important for third-party manufacturers that will be using their own cooler designs and higher base clock speeds. My testing reveals that third-party cards have the opportunity to be even faster, although how much you'll have to spend on a pre-overclocked card remains to be seen. Nvidia GeForce GTX 1060 Performance and Benchmark Results. Motherboard: Asus Z170 Deluxe. Processor: Intel Core i5-6600K, not overclocked. RAM: Corsair Vengeance 2666 MHz, 16GB DDR4. Cooler: Corsair H60 Liquid Cooler. PSU: Corsair CX750M. SSD: Samsung 850 EVO. OS: Windows 10 Pro 64-bit. The GTX 1060 is an extremely capable card at full HD resolutions and delivered well above 60 FPS in all the gaming benchmarks. In this section, I'm going to focus on 1440p performance, since this is an area where the GTX 1060 and the AMD Radeon RX 480 will go toe-to-toe. Pros: excellent FHD and 1440p performance. Quiet running. Incredibly low power consumption. Cons: More expensive than rivals. 4GB RX 480 is better value. Nvidia GeForce GTX 1060 technology. The GPU is based on a new Nvidia chip, the GP106. The headline-grabbing GTX 1070 and GTX 1080 cards both used the GP104. So as far as chip design is concerned, instead of taking the form of a binned GP104, a chip that wasn't good enough to be a 1080 or 1070, the GTX 1060 is a completely different product. However, there are things that remain. The GTX 1060 is powered by the same Pascal architecture as its more expensive siblings, and therefore benefits from the 16nm manufacturing process that enables Nvidia to cram more transistors on a given piece of silicon without increasing power consumption and heat to the same degree. The GTX 1060 has 1280 CUDA cores performing the bulk of the graphics legwork, which is more than the 1024 found on the previous generation GeForce GTX 960. Intriguingly, the GTX 1060 has a higher boost clock speed than its bigger brother, the GTX 1070, topping out at 1.7 GHz. With a different chip design and fewer CUDA cores, the clock speed won't translate to better performance, but the GTX 1060 should be able to play games at Full HD and 1440p, and that's before we get to overclocking. Away from the graphics chip itself, the GTX 1060 has 6GB of GDDR5 memory. This is 2GB less than the AMD Radeon RX 480, but still more than enough for today's modern games at Full HD and 1440p resolutions. The memory runs at 8-bits/SEC, which is standard these days for GDDR5 memory. Nvidia GeForce GTX 1060 design and connectors. I was sent in the Founders Edition of the GTX 1060, which is a more expensive, Nvidia-built version of the card. In all likelihood this won't be the version you end up buying, since Nvidia's partners will likely have their own cheaper, custom versions in short order. Still, it's a great looking card with die-cast aluminium highlights and a black plastic shroud. It isn't the metal fest of the 1070 or 1080, but it looks exciting nonetheless. It's just 9.8 inches in length, with just under a third of the length, a result of an extended plastic shroud that contains some of the cooling kit and the fan. Expect third-party manufacturers to produce extremely compact versions of the 1060, with cards suitable for ultra-small desktops and living room PCs. You get 3 DisplayPort connectors, an HDMI 2.0B port and a DVI port here. The DisplayPort 1.4 connectors are ready for HDR gaming, too.